So, good afternoon, or rather good evening. Welcome to all of you. Is artificial intelligence a new road to serfdom? This is the question of this afternoon or this evening. A question that might have several meanings. The first of them is an allusion to one of the best-known works by Lord Skidelsky, a book on the time after the world after communism, the American edition of which was entitled The Road from Serfdom. This explains the title of A New Road to Serfdom. So one could actually ask if artificial intelligence, it could be a new serfdom in several meanings. We all know about science fiction stories where human beings become enslaved by robots or machines. That would be one of the meanings. We are a bit more modest today. We are just asking, not just, but mainly asking for what artificial intelligence means for the future of work, what it means for jobs and for labor. Let me, in the very beginning, I will also introduce the two speakers on the panel here with me. Let me, in the very beginning, thank Docs Gallery for hosting us with this event, and especially Michaela Schilpochova, who is over here, who very nicely co-organized all of this with me. And let me organize the Masaryk Academy, Masarykova Akademicka Akademia. Mr. Chmelicek is also over there. I was very grateful to both of these institutions for hosting this event with us tonight. My name is Ludger Hagedorn. I'm a permanent fellow to the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. And Lord Skidelsky is, for the second time now, he is a visiting fellow to our institute, and he just arrived yesterday in Vienna, and already today we forced him on the train to come here, so he made quite some effort to be here, and I'm very thankful for that as well. So, if only those close to the computers and to the metaphorical gear sticks that run society have good incomes, then what happens to the rest of all of us? What happens to the factory workers? What happens to the butchers, to the bakers? What happens to the cashiers in the supermarkets and the bank accountants? And what happens, and this can also be seen already, we don't think about it primarily, but it is also to be seen, what happens ultimately in the end also to the engineers, the physicians, the professors, the lawyers, when artificial intelligence improves and takes over big parts of society. What if jobs disappear on a large scale and throughout all the different professions? And how precisely will AI, artificial intelligence, influence the labor market? Renowned economists hold that automation will substitute for more routinized occupations and complement high-skill, non-routine jobs. That means, whereas the effects on low-skill jobs will remain relatively small, it is precisely the big sector of medium-skill jobs that will gradually disappear, while demand for high-skill jobs will rise. So what remains in the end is, as two London School of Economics analysts have put it, the lovely jobs and the lousy jobs, and all the in-between will disappear. Several science fiction stories have raised the head of economic analysis to imagine a future in which a tiny minority of rich rentiers enjoy the almost unlimited service of a minimally paid majority. While, says Robert Skidelsky, the need for policy intervention to channel automation to human beings is beyond question. The real serpent in the garden is philosophical and ethical blindness. This is what we will try to go a bit into tonight. Let me just very briefly introduce the two speakers. Lord Robert Skidelsky is one of the best known and outstanding political economists, author of a prize-winning, remarkable biography of Maynard Keynes. And of the book that I mentioned in the very beginning, the allusion to which also gave the title to our talk today, The World After Communism from 1995, American edition, The Road from Serfdom. Robert Skidelsky is an elected fellow of the British Academy of Sciences, and we are very happy he's with us tonight. And even more so, Mr. Pechocek, I'm very thankful for you. On a very short-term notice, you volunteered to be with us tonight. You are a professor at the Czech Techno University in Prague, deputy head for the Department of Computer Science there. And that makes it very interesting, you also run a, let's call it a laboratory for artificial intelligence, for a better word, for the lack of a better word of it. You might have more to say that. And the idea for the evening is Mr. Skidelsky will present a few of his ideas. How will artificial intelligence influence the labor market? And Mr. Pechocek will have the opportunity to reply to that and maybe also to introduce some of the work that you are doing on the sector of artificial intelligence. Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And I want to touch on both of the topics to do with automation. I mean, the first is really the one you talked about, which is the impact of automation on world of work. But the second is a deeper one, which is, and that involves question of philosophy, which is whether automated systems will over time be able to transcend human intelligence and turn, reverse what Aristotle once thought. He said that, one day we'll have a world of mechanical slaves. But I wonder whether advances in computerization will go so far as to turn us into the slaves and the automatons into the masters. So I just want to broach a bit. I want to broach that a bit at the end. But let's take the two topics. I mean, both of them discuss artificial intelligence. But whereas the discussion about the impact of automation on work involves something that's called narrow artificial intelligence. That is artificial intelligence which is programmed to perform specific tasks. The second, which is the impact of automation on human beings, not just on their work, but on humanity, involves something called general intelligence, artificial intelligence, an intelligence that's capable of performing the full range of cognitive tasks. I mean, at the moment, we only have narrow intelligence, really. But I think a lot of people believe that general intelligence is a gleam in the eye of computer scientists, some of them, but its implications for human existence are quite profound. So I want to, towards the end of what I'm saying, I want to just talk a bit about that. Well, in terms of work, the world of work, the basic question is, are automated systems complements or replicants? Will they complement human work or will they replace it, or most of it? And there's a big debate. I mean, first of all, I mean, we have forecasts which are rather alarmist, and that is that we're in the fourth industrial revolution, that we're polarized, and our discussion is polarized between alarmist headlines of estimated job losses and robust business narratives pointed to the enhanced work possibilities which automation will open up. I mean, a typical of the jobs at risk story, you might say, is a report from the Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. There are many, many of these things. You get bored reading them almost every day. Their headlines, jobs at risk, robots are coming, and all this kind of thing. But here is, you know, a fairly sober kind of report, and I quote from it that the marriage of artificial intelligence and robotics could replace so many jobs that the era of mass employment will come to an end. That was from 2015. And the alarmist story is really that there are almost no jobs that robots couldn't do as well or even better than humans. Therefore, job losses due to automation will inevitably exceed those job losses that we experienced in the past through mechanization, which really replaced physical skills. We're now in the area in which robots are replacing cognitive skills. And so a whole swathe of professional jobs and middle income jobs is now thought to be at risk. So how do people deal with this? The benign people, the people who say this is all alarmist rubbish, they ask us to distinguish between jobs and tasks. And if you look at the whole pattern in terms of tasks, you then see that although certain tasks will be taken over by automated systems, they're parts of jobs, not the whole jobs. So this is where the idea of automation as a complement rather than a replicant comes into play. For example, the economic historian Brad DeLong wrote about this recently. He thinks that of the 10 work tasks that human beings used to do, only 4 will be left when narrow artificial intelligence has done its work. And he specified them as thinking critically, overseeing other humans, providing a human connection, and translating human wishes into a language that machines can understand. So the problem, then he says, is that very few of us have the genius to produce genuine economic value with our own creativity, and so what will the rest do? And so, like many others, he falls back on the idea that the new jobs will come from the caring sector, that an aging population, an increasingly wealthy population, will need more and more looking after, and therefore require ever larger armies of human carers, nurses, cleaners, trainers, therapists. And so somehow there'll be, with a transition period, it might take several decades, you will have a transition from the jobs that are, or tasks that are being automated into this world of caring, some of which will also be automated, but less of it than the other jobs, because they will require a human connection. And so wherever a human connection is still needed, you will have job replacements and task replacements going on. Now, all this narrative, these two narratives, really take place within what Heidegger called a scientific technical paradigm. And so the dominant view here is that these are the machines, they're coming, these systems are inevitable and they will determine our future, but the future needn't be as bad, the work future, as the alarmists believe it to be. Almost absent from this kind of narrative is the older view that machines offer emancipation from work, opening up a vista of active leisure, an idea going back to the Greeks, but also to be found in the writings of Karl Marx, John Stuart Mill, John Maynard Keynes, and others. And they comforted their readers with the thought that capitalism, by generating income and wealth, the income and wealth needed to abolish poverty, would abolish itself in time, freeing mankind, as Keynes put it, to live wisely and agreeably and well. You may say he was a utopian of another kind. And likewise, in The Soul of Man Under Socialism, Oscar Wilde claimed that with machinery doing all the ugly, horrible, uninteresting work, humans will have a delightful leisure in which to devise wonderful and marvelous things for their own joy and the joy of everyone else. And Bertrand Russell had exactly the same idea in his book, In Praise of Idleness. Now, implicit in this narrative, implicit, is the thought that technological innovation, having done its course, done its work in lifting humans out of poverty, will come to an end. There will be no more need for it. The machine will be completed, so to speak, and human life will flower in new and unexpected ways without any further assistance from technics. So that's implicit in this kind, and this brings me to my second topic, because such a future is far from the one envisaged by the technological utopians of Silicon Valley. For them, narrow artificial intelligence is simply a temporary limitation on the onward march of technical progress. The machine is far from completed, nor will it be completed until it has completed its work of creating a new, superior species. They don't fear that robots will escape from human control, which was one of the fears. What they fear, as in the film The Blade Runner, is that humans will escape from robotic control, or try to, and so ruin their noble project of transforming human nature. Now, all this sounds in one way mad, but there is a complete logic behind it, and it's also part of a project that has occupied some of the best minds of human endeavor since the Enlightenment. And what they really aim at, it's a program of perfecting the human species. The famous remark by Kant, humanity's crooked timber will never be straightened. But here is a project, the goal of straightening it. So, you know, what the techno enthusiasts want to do is simply to crack the human code. And for example, there are plans to make people work on plans to make humans immortal. June Young, another Silicon Valley angel investor and staunch advocate of immortalism, has said that he has the idea that aging is plastic, that it is encoded. If something is encoded, you can crack the code. And in Silicon Valley's estimate, then, death and old age are problems to which technology will one day provide neat and presumably marketable solutions. Now, today's, I think, techno-optimists, I call them techno-optimists, techno-enthusiasms, techno-fanatics, they're there, and they're working. Are heirs to what, in 1995, Richard Barbrook and Andy Cameron called the Californian ideology, and what another writer has recently called the Wired ideology, after Wired magazine. The Wired ideology fused the cultural bohemianism of San Francisco with the high-tech entrepreneurialism of Silicon Valley. And in the minds of the Valley's libertarians, technology is seen as the force liberating humans, not just from work, but from the imperfections of human life itself. Humanity is the problem that has to be solved. Now, what impresses me is the parallelism between the technological enthusiasm and the neoclassical economics. They're really bedfellows. Neoclassical economics, and I don't know how many of you are economists here, it shares the robotic imagination. In 1988, for example, a Nobel laureate, Robert Lucas, wrote of his own work. My aim, and this is modeling, this is how he models the human beings. My aim is to construct a mechanical, artificial world populated by interacting robots. And his fellow Nobel laureate, Thomas Sargent, defines a person as a constrained intertemporal stochastic optimization problem. That's what we are. We are constrained in a constrained intertemporal stochastic optimization problem. Now, if you can get this constraint out of the way, you and as you have perfect information, stochastic shocks will no longer be there. At least they won't be stochastic. They'll still be there, but they're not going to be. They're not going to really alter your trajectory. Then you do have a perfect human being. So what their view is that imperfect information is the source of all economic evils. To them, and perfect forecasting is the key to perfect efficiency. Equipped with hugely speeded up computational powers and access to big data and behavioral analytics, humans will no longer make forecasting errors. They will be on an information superhighway. The question then to be asked about general artificial intelligence is the same we asked earlier in the context of work about narrow artificial intelligence. Will it complement humans or will it replace them? Alarmists like the late Stephen Hawking famously warned that AI could spell the end of the human race. And he's not a wild. I mean, he was a serious scientist. So the question is whether general artificial intelligence is a possibility or a fantasy, because at present it doesn't exist. Machines take our instructions and are subject to our own cognitive imperfections. And they operate within the frame of possibilities set by their human creators, as in a game of chess. They may learn to make better moves within the game, but they can't change the game itself. I mean, that's a very important view. But the technological utopians, I think, reject that kind of limitation. They look forward to the development of a general artificial intelligence which isn't just capable of performing as wide a range of cognitive tasks as human beings, but of outperforming humans in every department, outthinking them, and even surpassing them morally enhanced humans, in effect replacing them with a new species. Now, there's a whole debate going on, and I just want to mention two people who have been involved in it, or at least two people who represent different positions. The first is Ray Kurzweil. He's very well known. He has predicted the emergence of hyper-intelligent artificial intelligence by the year 2045. A technological singularity or tipping point would come after which the further development of technology would be taken over by machines, and technological progress would speed up exponentially. Kurzweil claims that this artificial hyperintelligence will retain vestiges of human intelligence, but for all intents and purposes will represent something new, better, post-human. Following the singularity, which I remind you is due to take place in about 25 years' time, he claims that intelligence will radiate outwards from the Earth in the form of tiny self-replicating probes with nano-robotic crews, first into the solar system, then interstellar space, then the galaxies, and so on until the entire universe is suffused with intelligent, albeit synthetic life. And Kurzweil refers to this process as the universe waking up. An appealing vein of mysticism, but the human problem will then be solved when it wakes up. And one should add here, when one thinks this is all crazy, remember this is the culmination, or one culmination, of the dream of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, lighting up the dark places of human existence. And even earlier, a culmination of Plato's image of escaping from the cave of shadows into the sunlight of reality. But now, what does it depend on? What's the premise underlying such a possibility? Well, it depends on whether human life and human intelligence are divisible into sets of processes which can be optimized. Now, you may not agree with this, but you may also. The utopians imagine that human intelligence, and indeed any phenomenon in the universe, can be reduced to and represented by a set of discrete symbols, separate. In other words, the entire universe is fundamentally digital in nature, amounting to a set of facts or bits of information, each logically independent of the other, and which can be combined and recombined in ever more novel combinations. And this basic assumption is what the other party to the debate, I want to quote Bert Dreyfus, referred to as the ontological assumption in his book, What Computers Can't Do. What Dreyfus argued was this assumption lay at the basis of the persistent optimism of workers in the field of artificial intelligence, despite it in reality representing no more than a highly dubious philosophical hypothesis. Dreyfus further demonstrated the conceptual problems that one ultimately encounters when one follows this assumption through consistently as an account of intelligent behavior. As he puts it, when one assumes that our facts of the world is knowledge of millions of discrete When one assumes that our knowledge of the world is knowledge of millions of discrete facts, the problem of artificial intelligence becomes the problem of storing and accessing a larger and larger database. Now, I want to come to my conclusion by just dwelling a moment on this issue, because I think it is the key to the whole thing, if I can find it here. I'll need to go much further into the Dreyfus-Kurzweil argument than I can do now, or even than I've penetrated myself. But as I understand Dreyfus, he is taking an organic view of the human personality and social structure, as opposed to the digital or atomic view of Kurzweil and other techno enthusiasts. I'm struck, not for the first time, by the natural alliance between the techno-utopians and neoclassical economists. Economists start from the philosophic premise of methodological individualism, and by a simple additive principle derive any outcome of interest. So you add up the individual units and you get an aggregate outcome, which of course they then can predict. If you equip each of their units with perfect rationality and perfect information, the key assumption, the sum, the additive sum adds up to God. My strong suspicion is that the techno-utopians are on the same quest in their efforts to deconstruct the human mind. But if one accepts the organic hypothesis, not just of individual humans, but of the social structure, and takes interdependence seriously. One is doomed to failure because one is not dealing with concrete nano parts. One is dealing with an incredibly complex web of relationships which can't be added up or recombined as though they were individual bits. So I think there's some philosophic question at the heart of the development, or the dream of developing a general intelligence. And that is comforting for humans, because if the dream of developing a general intelligence is ever realized, then the human race will really become obsolete, like the Neanderthals. I mean, they won't be able to compete because they will be stuck with the imperfections in their condition, the moral imperfections, as well as all those other traits that have driven human culture, human art, and everything else. They will be stuck with them, but another lot of people will have passed over to something more perfect, more beautiful, more more divine. So you may say all this is really a bit of fantasy, but we have to ask, what is the path on which our civilization is traveling? Is it inevitable? Is there anything one can do or should do to stop the march of technology, both in terms of work and in terms of our own future? These seem to be fundamental questions, and I mean, just as important in the long run as related questions like climate change. The point is, we don't understand what's going on. I mean, here are invisible masters. Well, no one understands really, except an expert, how cloud works, how it connects up a whole lot of computers electronically, and how it then links us up to each other. I don't think anyone understands this, except the experts. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Robert. I think this was just the right moment. I think, Michael, you can agree that what Mr. Skidelsky was offering to us is, I mean, he's not only the Cassandra here, it's not only and all over bleak, but quite a fairly balanced view that he tried to give. But in the end, we had quite a bleak picture of with a comparison to the Neanderthals and will the human race become obsolete. So these are serious questions. I guess you might have a slightly different view on that. And maybe you can also combine your statement with telling us a bit more about what you're doing, your fascinating project that you're working on. I leave it to you in what order you want to tell us about that and to what points raised by Robert Skidelsky you would want to react, please.
So thank you very much. First, thank the organizers for inviting me here to the stage to be here with you guys. It's a great honor. Unless questions would come from the audience, I'll try to refrain from speaking about my own work. I would rather comment on the aspects of AI and jobs, which I think it's a very, very important topic and worth discussing. But I'll open my position statement with a response to general AI. So the general AI optimists, and I'm a general AI pessimist myself, but the general AI optimists, they claim that once a general AI comes, it takes over. It either would kill all people, which I don't believe it will, or it will act so that people would know that general AI is already here, right? So we may only speculate whether general AI already came or it didn't. I would start my thought with what David Graeber said about the jobs. So David Graeber defines bullshit jobs and shit jobs, like two categories of jobs that will be like very important at the times of AI. You know, bullshit job is this like very expensive job where the person is paid like really, really well, does nothing, provides no value, and once after a couple of years he wants to resign from his job, you know, they will pay him more to stay. This is a bullshit job. You know, many of those jobs are in the commercial sector, are in governments, and this is a huge waste of the society. And AI that is trying to optimize whatever is going around will be eliminating bullshit jobs. But you know, our society needs shit jobs, which are jobs of people who are cleaning the streets, who are caring about the others, who are like really underpaid. But without those, the society wouldn't function, right? So this division between bullshit jobs and shit jobs will actually define how AI will be changing the job market, I believe. And, you know, there was this report 2018 when Barack Obama, not 18, it was before, it was 50 maybe, when he procured this AI report on the US economy, and they came up with this conclusion that whatever job that is being paid less than $20 an hour will be eliminated with like 80% of likelihood, like 80% of those jobs will go, while only 4% of jobs that are paid more than $40 an hour will be eliminated by AI. And I actually think that you're given the Graeber argument that this doesn't make sense, because for AI it will make much more sense to go after jobs that are like highly paid, because they're like huge savings. With rather little investment, your society can save quite a bit by not employing these jobs. Hence this whole trend of RPA, robotic process automation, where software companies are coming and automating the jobs in banks and in other public administrations and big companies is very efficient. You know, I don't know whether you guys know that the biggest unicorn in RPA comes from Romania. It's like a software shop which is worth these days like, I don't know, like 3 billion or even more. And those guys are replacing a mental repetitive jobs in big corporations. It's very successful. And you see it's, in a way, it's cheaper to replace somebody who is gonna sending an email from one person to the other or copying a data from this file to the other file rather than to building a robot. So you see that the mental repetitive work is in a way simpler, easier and cheaper to replace, and it's yielding substantially more profit. An example of this kind of repetitive mental work is driving, right? So driving is in a way complex. You know, it's not easy for a robot to carry out. Hence, it's monotonous, it's repetitive, and there is no creativity. And those jobs will go. You know, the reports say that like 3 million drivers in the US. All those guys will be without the job in only a few years to come. And there are those projects where, you know, researchers believe that the first which is going to happen will be truck drivers that are delivering cargo from East Coast to West Coast are totally unnecessary, that you can put a truck on the road and it will drive by itself. There are a couple of things that haven't been resolved as of yet, like merging into the lanes. It's a big problem for an automated truck to be able to merge into the lanes with human drivers, because this is what human drivers apparently can do still better. But even those tiny pieces and bits will be replaced very soon. I actually liked your point about caring. I also believe that in the future there will be like many more jobs in caring, like people-to-people jobs. And my argument often comes from healthcare. Like in the US, like 25% of all the healthcare costs goes to physicians that are doing mainly diagnostics and to prescription drugs. And those two fields will be automated. You know, the process how you can research prescription drug will be more automated, it'll be more data driven, it will be cheaper, and the diagnostics that the physicians are doing will be also substantially cheaper because it will go away. You know, the physicians wouldn't need to kind of sell years of their experience, because there'll be machine learning on top of big data that will help the patients to understand what these symptoms are and how they can be treated. So I actually believe that AI will be liberating healthcare to big extent. It will be democratizing healthcare, like many more people will have an access to healthcare because of dropping costs. And in the future, I truly believe that we will need less physicians, like order of the magnitude less physicians, but we will need more nurses. Because your nursing, helping people, capable people will be, as you rightfully pointed out, required. However, there'll be also robotic nurses. And I'm afraid to predict that I think that in the countries that will be rich, we will have human nurses that will be kind of helping us, and countries that will be underdeveloped and will be less economically robust, we will have a robotic caretakers. Because I truly believe that in the future, only the countries that will be rich, which will be able to create lots of economical wealth through a proper deployment of AI, through proper contribution to the technological change, to understanding the change, those countries will be rich, there will be lots of GDP, people will be rich, and those can afford to pay this vast army of people who will be doing caring jobs. I would like to live in such a country, in a country where this won't be implemented, in a country where people will be scared of AI, will not embrace the change, will try to prevent it. I believe that those countries will be less successful and in the end will be more dependent and would have less opportunities to pay so many jobs that won't be AI related. I believe that there'll be like two types of jobs that will be creating an imminent economical wealth and jobs that will be there for people, right? And I also believe that the other types of jobs will be like more heterogeneous. It will be helping people, caring for people. It will be also educating children. Mothers will be with children no longer at home. It's also a type of a job. People will be studying, retraining, lots of education. So the other types of work, not necessarily the wealth-generating work, will be super important. I give you one example, right? So in logistics, right? Everybody is now buying lots of stuff over the internet, and there is this huge logistic backend for us to deliver shoes and watches and trainers, whatever we are buying. And the cargo is being sent all over the world. And in the logistics centers, they are mainly full robotized. The robots are kind of packing, unpacking, moving stuff. But often in those logistics centers, there are a couple of people who are doing those tasks that are super boring, non-creative, but for some reason difficult to automate, right? So you see, currently AI is not bothered because AI is okay to leave people there doing those mundane piece of jobs and is focusing on RPA in the banks, right? However, as soon as people will become less reliable, it will start also replacing those human jobs there. And we see this, I was speaking with my friends in Germany who work for Zalando, and they say that, before Christmas, we just need to onboard like another 3,000 people to do those jobs. After Christmas, we would fire them. So even though this piece of job is not complex, it's not expensive, the limits of scalability is a problem. So their people are not scalable and are not fully reliable. So the idea currently is to start automating also those pieces of workflow that hasn't been automated before. I would end up with one observation where I would say that for a society to be able to overcome the AI crisis, I actually think that currently the time where AI is coming and it's changing the way how we live, and it's still a narrow AI, not general AI. I think this may be a crisis if we are unable to cope with it in the best possible way. So I think we need 4 things to be able to cope with the forthcoming AI crisis. One is ethical and legal compliance. Kind of people need to understand whether AI should be regulated and how. I think this is like super important, and there needs to be an intelligent debate. Second, we need governance, which is ready for AI. Governance which understands where AI is going and how AI will be changing the way how we earn money. This is like very important. I don't see any government that is paying a proper attention to this aspect of AI, AI and jobs, because if the society is unable to carry people through the change, it may be disastrous. The last but one is energy. So we still haven't cracked down the problem of energy. We don't have enough energy for AI and for cars and for everything that we kind of need to run. So I don't want to live in a world where AI will be switching off my fridge because it needs to compute, right? And the last but one are jobs, and all those kinds of jobs, the jobs that will be generating wealth, where currently we have way too many opportunities and not too many people. So even AI programmers are being automated these days, maybe even faster than lawyers, because it's such a huge demand for AI programmers and there are not that many. So we've got lots of automation in AI programming, but also jobs for people who cannot participate in the AI change.
Thank you, Michael. I think especially the last 4 points were very, very crucial, and I guess that Robert Skidelsky will want to react on that. Just let me add one more single question. You can try to respond to it quickly or shortly, and then Robert may take over. I think this is very clear from the talk so far. I think we all agree that AI will have a heavy impact on the labor market. This is for sure. I think we can also agree that it is pretty difficult, I would say impossible, to estimate to what degree really. I mean, how many percent of jobs will be lost. It's very, very difficult to calculate and probably not possible to do it seriously. So what we are working with is like hypotheses, and they are rather bleak or more optimistic. But I think in general, it is always connected to a certain vision of society, or a certain vision of the society of the future. And if you read into people who deal with this question, they tend to be either very, very optimistic or really, really pessimistic, and draw a dystopian picture of the world where very much along the lines of the human race will become redundant, and there will be this Blade Runners running around, and this is really bad times, or overly optimistic. And I just have 2 sentences. You read this very much of this on the internet. These 2 sentences: perhaps a society composed of contented people doing what they wanted would be a better one, would be better informed one than one by the Protestant work ethic. A society of stoned, TV watching skiers and golfers and surfers would probably be happier than the one we live in now. No, that was not Robert Skidelsky. Do you share this vision of the society of the future in regards to AI? Is this the kind of society we are going for?
It's super difficult, I believe that we are coming to the society where there'll be a big proportion of population that will be caring, and there will be a big part of the population that will be creative. And I actually think that those 2 kind of inherently human qualities will be those that will continue to distinguish us from the algorithms, the creativity and caring. And I actually think that the bridge is the educational system. Downside, though, is that changing and improving education can never be done with the speed that is required, given the technological change. But I actually think that being able to introduce more creativity into schools, more values into schools, can get us to kind of be in the space where people will not only play golf and entertain themselves, but they will be identified not with generating economical value, but they'll be identified with purpose. Currently, this relation that what my job is, this is what I am. For the last 200, 300 years, people are identified with their jobs and their work. I think this will kind of be transformed into being identified with a purpose. Why am I here?
Yeah, so thank you. I mean, I don't think, the dream of good spending a life, on drugs is a sort of something that, one can think of as an ethical goal. On the other hand, there's a lot of people now are arguing that you should abandon the goal of increasing gross national product in the traditional sense and rather aim for happiness. There's a big happiness movement Well, what is happiness? You can be very happy if you're drugged the whole time. I mean, so, you know, the trouble with happiness is it's really something to do with a subjective feeling. It's not to do with purpose. It's just to do with feeling good. And if you think you're empty, life is empty and might give you some bad feelings, you take artificial, you tranquilize yourself in one way or another. That would be actually logically quite compatible with the goal of happiness. It's got nothing to do with the Greek idea of happiness, which is actually living a worthwhile life, a life in which you can take satisfaction. But it's interesting that in all this discussion about automation and work, very few people give any importance to the idea of reducing the hours of work. You know, which automation might make possible. It's all a question of finding alternative jobs. Sure, at higher pay, but the idea, I mean, what's happened in the past for 200 years is that people have traded off higher incomes and reduced hours. The hours of work since the Industrial Revolution, since about 1850, have fallen by about 10 hours, 15 hours a week. But, you know, that's come to an end now. On the whole, hours of work have fallen very, very little. And the reason they've fallen very, very little is because incomes have stagnated as well. And the reason both of those two things have happened is that most of the gains of productivity recently have gone to the owners and not to the rest of the population, small minority of owners. So, I mean, for your idea to be recognized as it should be, there's the question of how do you share the gains from automation? That requires very big changes in social policy. It requires some form of social democracy. At the moment, we accept rising inequality because that is the dominant ideology of all governments in power in Europe. There's been a retreat from redistribution everywhere. And of course, in a way, the European Union makes it possible because the argument is if you increase your taxes as a nation, then capital will emigrate to a lower tax area and you'll get a race to the bottom. So inequality is built in to the way the present system works. You're never going to get an acceptance, real acceptance of automation unless you get a more equal society. Otherwise, the Luddites, the people who broke the machines in the 19th century, were justified. Who's going to look after us? And then you get quite an elaborate economic argument about long-run gains, and transitions to better. And then they say, well, how long is this transition going to last? Who's going to look after us in this transition? Who's going to pay for the education we need? Who's going to pay for the training and work training we need to adapt to the new situation? Is it governments who are always cutting their budgets because they're afraid of deficits? I mean, so all these are very, very serious questions. So one gets a very sensible idea of where things might go, but one faces institutions that are simply not geared up to take advantage of them. The other thing is, I think, very important in one of the things you say in your second point, which is the governments should understand what's going on. Well, governments don't understand what's going on. They do not understand the processes of computerization. They may grasp some of its effects. How does it work? Who is controlling it? Who's controlling the information flow? I mean, there's a lot of misinformation flow as well. What are the giant companies like Google and Facebook actually aiming at? They're aiming at monopoly. And if you build up a sufficient data set, you have first starter advantages, which are huge. You can basically squeeze anyone else out of the business for a long, long time. And then what about the manipulation that's going on? All the way through this information flow, which has been hugely expanded, huge big data increase, incredible increase in computing power, so that we have, real-time information of a kind we never had before. What's it being used for? the optimists say it's being used to expand democracy. Everyone will now know what only experts knew before. Rubbish. It's total rubbish. I mean, people are more in the dark about, of course they know how to press some buttons on their iPhones or their, and get something delivered. They know that, but how does it work? How is it all transmitted? Who's controlling it? All these seem to me huge questions.
Michael, do you feel the urgent need to respond to this directly, or otherwise I would want to give it a bit more of a political twist also, because your second point that you raised was about governments and the very simple question, since Robert is also not that very far from the political arena. How are politicians, how are governments prepared for that, and how is it on an international level? If you compare, like, for example, in the European Union and Britain, you see, I already count Britain out, right? This is a different world. So European Union and Britain and America, I mean, that is famous for the innovative work on artificial intelligence, and maybe the big player China. I don't know who wants to be first to just give it more of a political.
Maybe to correct one thing you said, I mean, I raised the political question very, very centrally. What tax system do you require in order to make people comfortable with automation?
So there are also other things we can tax. It doesn't necessarily need to be work. We can tax carbon, for example, right? So there are kind of different ideas how taxation can help to shape the world. To your point, I totally agree that the new models of redistribution needs to come out. So people are debating like the minimal income and those type of ideas. If you look around, how many people work in government, in administration, in artificial employment, this is a type of like a minimal income being provided to people even these days, and it's actually massive. And these are the bullshit jobs. Like there are a lot of bullshit jobs currently coming, and we see them. And AI will be pushing those jobs. Will be kind of eliminating this a minimal guaranteed income that we currently have in the governments. I also agree with your point with manipulation. The society is currently being manipulated by AI tremendously. So there was an expectation that AI and internet will be liberating our knowledge, and we will understand more things, and we can make better decisions. The whole race of us getting into chambers and kind of echoing our opinion within chambers actually is working the opposite. And if the society is split into two halves, which are like lots of societies we see around, then a social network and a micro campaigns can easily manipulate the outcome, which is what we see in the Czech Republic. This is what we see in the UK. This is what we see in America. So to your point, I agree that the manipulation in divided societies, this is something where AI can do huge damage, and we are a witness of that damage actually. And it is attributed to machine learning. It definitely is. It's attributed to our capability to process big data and use it for not only for selling stuff on the internet, but also for selling ideas. And yeah, this is a disaster. I would add to your question about geopolitical fight in AI. It looks like that we have invented AI in 2018. It wasn't here before. And now whoever claims that he would be an AI governance can be an AI governance, unfortunately is not so. AI is a result of tens of years of investment in research. And the truth is that the US, through their defense investment and through the investment that the internet monopolies are currently providing, are years ahead in AI research comparing to Europe. In Europe, the only European countries that are per par with research in AI would be UK, would be Switzerland, would be Israel, right? So everybody who is kind of on the edge of the European Union. And then China, Chinese scientists are also excelling in AI because they were able to catch up strategically 10 years ago. Like 10 years ago, there were those programs where Chinese were funding scientists to come over to China from US. They paid like big checks, building houses. They came and they helped. But the Chinese did that like 10 years ago. So because they have done this before, so now they are harvesting great results. And there is the difference also between EU and China is with relationship to data. It's much easier to kind of get an access to personal data in China. So therefore the opportunity to build high speed, high fidelity apps, AI apps is much greater than in the EU where we value data privacy.
Yeah. I think there's another point you raised, which I think is very important when you talked about your third point of energy, because what you said there, I think, is very significant because it links up with climate. And I think, if I'm not misquoting you, you say there's not enough energy to run AI and everything else. So what you know, we always talk about developing, I mean, how expensive in energy terms would really a greater penetrate, an automated system that penetrated much more deeply into life than it does now. I mean, the penetration of robots in the UK is very, very small so far. Although there have been leaders in developing it, they haven't. But suppose it goes from 10% to 15% to 20% to 30%. What are the energy implications of that, and what kind of energy? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd like to ask. I mean, I'm genuinely interested to know.
Yeah, nobody knows exactly. It's very difficult to calculate, but there are some data points. An interesting data point is the energy that all the Bitcoin users worldwide require for encrypting and decrypting the Bitcoin transactions. It's the same as the whole consumption of energy in the Czech Republic, or in Ireland, or in Austria, or in Slovakia. Like one country is only Bitcoin's processing, right? So you see that, and we would need much more encryption in the future with all the fake news and with all the manipulation of video that is just behind the corner. Encryption and certification will be super important. Nobody would be reading news without being able to encrypt and decrypt the content to kind of believe the news. So we will be more encrypting. So that's an example why we would need much more compute and energy. And the second one is storing data. There's so much data that we are storing so many images that we have on the cloud. At least they are charging for this, right? But even then, it's a huge amount of data that are melting the glaciers, and there is also a limit to how long they can be cooled down.
In trying to, if one's interested in trying to reverse the increase in CO2 emissions and methane and so on, which are quite threatening according to all sort of reports, and really become very threatening as you go through the 21st century. What sort of policy and which bits of energy use should you concentrate? Either which bits of energy use should you concentrate on reducing, or which sort of mitigating action, like planting trees and absorption? I mean, how does policy work out on that? I'd be interested in what you think about it.
Yeah, I've been proposing to stop taxing labor and start taxing CO2, right? So stop taxing labor. Okay, so we've been taxed on labor for the last 300 years. It's an arbitrary idea. It may not mean to be the perfect idea. So instead of taxing labor, and we'll have less labor in the future. So why to continue taxing that, and tax CO2 emission instead? It's surprising to me that piece of meat is like 10 times cheaper than Beyond Meat vegetarian burger, right? Vegetarian burger is much more expensive, while the CO2 implication on this burger is like 1/50th of the meat burger, right? So why don't we start taxing meat? Because meat is producing lots of CO2, right? Transportation, right? So there are different means of transportation. Yeah, as Macron did, right? So this is a risky, and this kind of comes back to the governance idea, right? So the current governments are not equipped, I would say, intellectually and are risk averse to be able to push those agendas through. They got like different troubles, and there are lots of leaders who don't believe in global warming. So
don't say any names. So I know, Michel, unfortunately we are running out of time. We promised to stop before 7, but maybe there is the short time for comment or question from the audience, the most urgent ones, 1 or 2. Let's have it 2, and then so that you can hand it on. There was something.
Yeah. Ms. Skidelsky, thank you so much for your contribution, and Michal, of course. I noticed from your biography that you were born in China and that actually at one point you lived in Tianjin when you were a boy. And last month, the Chinese Communist Party announced that the city of Tianjin was spending $4.7 billion on its artificial intelligence systems. To put that in perspective, Angela Merkel is talking about 400 million euros for Germany over a longer time period. So when we combine that with Michal's very well made point about state access to universal data sets, and so citizens in China having to hand over their personal data in ever more complicated ways, then I wanted to get your sort of political economy mind, especially based on your Cold War experience and thinking through Soviet Union and units of production and so on and so forth. It seems to me that that is probably the area where political economics and really understanding what the Chinese Communist Party is about in relation to this technology. Yeah, I'd be very interested in your thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. I have 2 brief comments. Okay. The first is that the energy optimization is most likely a narrow AI problem itself. How is it best? Where should we minimize energy? And the second comment is that in these discussions, I often lament that the topic of what civil liberties and rights will be given to AI agents is usually not discussed so much. Like, will AI agents participate in their own capitalist economy, or will it be some top-down slave-like hierarchy? And I'd like to see that discussed more often, and that's all.
The first, and then maybe, yeah. You see, I mean, what I find incredibly depressing is the infantile nature of some, of international relations. I mean, here is a huge resource which could be immensely beneficial to humans. It could also be very, very destructive. Anyway, it needs to be used very, very widely. But it is a kind of tool for international geopolitical competition. I mean, as has often been pointed out, most of the developments in AI came from the military. Everyone involved in developing computers and automated systems were really, and that's why America took the lead in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They were all connected with the military and with military competition. They were a byproduct of that. Now, that is not how one wants to see the future of automation developing. it should be judged entirely by how one thinks it contributes to the welfare of the human race. That should be the only criterion. But it's actually being used in this kind of way. So China needs to get ahead because, it wants to challenge the United States, so it's said. United States needs to keep ahead because all of this seems to me, these seem to me the logic of the nursery. And as long as we're subject to that, we haven't got much hope, I think. Anyway, I leave. I think the other question I did, the role of users. But the role of users is very, very important. I'm afraid I'm a bit pessimistic. I think the users, I think the idea that there would be a new democracy created by the internet, the democracy of the internet, which would be a genuine democracy for the first time, I think in a way it suffered from some of the enthusiasm of the Techno utopians as well. It was a utopian idea, and in practice, I think people more than not are being manipulated, and they don't have rights. Let's talk about it afterwards, maybe if we have. What sort of rights should they have?
Real quick, I just add one thought to this geopolitical AI struggle. This aspect that is not often debated is not only like competing in who has got a better algorithm, who's got a smarter AI-based cars, but often is done for the purpose of combining AI and cybersecurity. So President Putin was the one who claimed like 3 years ago that nobody can win World War III without AI. And I don't believe that we will be seeing like sophisticated AI-enabled soldiers. So to me, this is a science fiction. We won't be seeing many drones gonna kill people, but we'll be seeing AI on the internet, kind of manipulating countries, changing the countries. And actually, we are currently a witness of like early start of AI cyber warfare between Russia and the United States. So I actually think that the geopolitical investments into AI are very much connected with defense these days.
So thank you very much. I think we have to stop at this point at 7. In very few minutes, there will be another debate starting downstairs, Michaela, right? I'm not informed about the topic, otherwise I would announce it. But I think those of you who are interested, so that you can go there. Thanks to all of you for being with us tonight for this debate on the impact of artificial intelligence on the labor market. Thank you very much to the two here on the stage, to Michal Pichocek. It was very nice that you joined us for that on a very short notice, and to Lord Skidelsky.
Very good. It's a good subject. Yeah, is it?